First of all, I would like to thank SQIP for this opportunity for this roundtable discussion. It is both exciting to share our knowledge as much as we want to learn from all of us, and this topic of ethical issue in quality research. I'll be presenting 2 points because the scope is large, but perhaps I focus on these 2 points to stimulate further discussion. This is obviously coming from healthcare discipline. So the point that I would like to share is really about 2 important ethical considerations in carrying out quality study, in particular data collection. One is untold stories, the other one is conflicts of agreement to participate in interview by the participant, or it might be a focus group discussion. So let's take the first point, the untold story. Well, the untold stories, because the nature of quality studies, we often go in depth in discovering experiences of the participants, and there are many sensitive areas, in particular healthcare. Sometimes we discover something like depression, abuse, violation of rules and regulation, for example, stealing, things like that, misbehavior and things like that. So in face of this misconduct, so to speak, where do we stand as healthcare providers? Because we need to be very careful. We have many hats as we carry out our scientific studies. We might be taking a role as a scientist or therapist or even a citizen, because in any way we are a citizen of any country, one of the countries. So I guess from the citizen point of view, we need to abide to laws and regulation, right? As a therapist, we think about the best interest of a patient. Right? It might sometimes have conflict with rules and regulation and laws of the country as well. On a scientific ground, we also might have our own agenda to promote, so to speak, scientific knowledge, discovery of human experiences, and sometimes we advocate for patients, and sometimes we advocate for scientific evidence. So we can see here as which role are we playing when we encounter this sensitive issue. So that calls for a very delicate balance of where we put our weight, what is more important, all right? So therefore, sometimes it is not an easy issue. For example, a patient who has a history, or a participant with a history of domestic violence and abuses. So do we report the case to the authority, or do we ask for a therapeutic consultation during the session, or do we just take the experience and write about the patient's stories and it ends there? So it is a definitely delicate experience that if we can have a discussion later, there will be much more exciting, right? So the second point to raise is really when we recruit participants. In a healthcare perspective, of course, many of our participants are patients, and they are the vulnerable groups, yeah, from healthcare perspective, because they are ill in some sense to start off with, and hence there are a lot of compromise in the decision-making ability. So the conflicts of agreement to participate in interview from relationship perspective can be quite a challenge. And we can see for example, from our Asian culture, there's a consensus concept of respect for the elders. And this might impede on patients' self rights, their advocacy for their own self rights and their speak up for their own self might be a little bit dampened because of the cultural background. So this potential for agreeing to participate despite being detrimental to their own benefit. So therefore, where do we stand as a healthcare provider or a researcher? So there's always a relationship between patient, researcher, and healthcare providers. So where do we put patient interests first? In some sense, sometimes patients are aware of it, sometimes patients are not aware of it. And who is the so-called the guardians to look after this interest of the patient? Should it be healthcare provider, where there's a long-term therapeutic relationship issue? Or should there be a colleague, researcher and healthcare provider, that there's a colleague relationship between us? And will that jeopardize if we disallowed our patient to be interviewed by a researcher? And of course, researcher and patient, there's always data quality concern. So looking back at these 2 issues, where do we go in that sense? What is the solution for it? I don't think there's a straightforward answer. And obviously, moving forward, the best thing is always be critical and aware of participant interest or the patient interest in this sense. So their interests come first, of course, but how do we groom ourselves or how we train ourselves being a valid tool or being critical ourselves? That is a challenge and a journey that quality researchers have to go through in their years of this journey. Yeah. Thank you for this, and now we can open for discussion later. Thank you.